Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. It's that time of the week again. It's time we take a look back at the most recent week of college football and figure out which players are moving their stock up in the upcoming NFL draft. As usual, we go over some numbers, we go over some little nuances, and then we focus in on those guys who are starting to inch up the boards at positions of obvious upcoming need for the Seahawks. So, quarterback, we're going to start there. There were some big time quarterbacks this week. Bye weeks are starting to become a factor, though. A lot of the top guys, not just a quarterback, but every position did not play this last week. So a little bit harder to find guys, but that does force you to find new guys. So at the same time, it can be a little bit exciting. That being said, all these quarterbacks are pretty familiar to us by now. They're guys that we've talked about previously. Leading off with Caleb, because he was just really, really good out there. I know that we're not getting Caleb. I know that there's no way we've already won too many games to get Caleb Williams, but he was just pretty lights out. So I got to shout him out. 30 for 40, 403 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception, 5 carries for 12 yards. 9 of his throws were completed for 18 plus yards, so he's making plays down the field. Granted, Colorado's defense is pretty sad, but pretty respectable game. 77.3 PFF grade for him. Really nice game. Also, got to give a shout out to Quinn Ewers. He got back on the wagon for Texas. 25 of 35 for 325 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But he supplemented that with 7 carries for 40 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's showing an ability to also make some things happen with his legs that obviously he doesn't have the mobility of some of the top guys in this area, but he can do some stuff with his feet. 7 of his throws that were completed went for 18 or more yards, 73.8 PFF grade. He continues to legitimize himself as a potential first rounder in this upcoming draft. Jaden Daniels, again, even though LSU lost, you can't really put it on him. 27 of 36 for 414 yards and 4 touchdowns. 15 carries for 99 yards and a touchdown. PFF grade was flat 90. So he threw for 400 and almost ran for 100. That's some Vince Young stuff back in the day. There's nothing Jaden Daniels is ever going to be able to do to overcome the fact that he's small. He's like, according to Sports Reference, I think he's like 180 pounds. But there's something intriguing here. He's hitting some big time throws. He's making plays down the field. He's making NFL throws. I like him late rounds. Got to give it up to Bo Nix as well. He continues to be incredibly accurate. And by accurate, I mean he's completing a high percentage of his throws. I know he's not traditionally accurate in the Justin Herbert way, but 27-32, 290 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 runs for 18 yards, 90.2 PFF grade. So that's just excellent. And as much as I will never be able to get over my reservations about Bo Nix because of his accuracy, he is playing extremely well so far this year. We also got to give it up to Mike Penix. I know it was kind of a weird game because he didn't throw for any touchdowns because UW kept running the ball in the red zone. But honestly, of the draftable quarterbacks, I still think he was one of the best of the week. 30 for 40, 363 yards, 77.6 PFF grade. That's still one of the best performances of the week. He just happened to run the ball when we got in the red zone. So, Penix, really good week as well. And that is the standout quarterbacks for me in this most recent college football week. Okay, now we're moving along to tight end here, and we're starting with another guy we're never going to get to draft, Brock Bowers of UGA, because he was just so incredibly good for Georgia in a game that was much closer than expected. They needed every bit of him. 8 catches, 157 yards, a touchdown, including the game-winning touchdown, by the way. He had 1 carry for 3 yards, 94.3 PFF grade. This guy can do it all as far as tight ends go. Absolutely money. Absolutely incredible stuff from Bowers. And I had to mention him in this segment, even though I recognize we're not drafting him. He's going to be gone. At this rate, he may end up going in that top 8. Caden Prescorn of Ole Miss was the next guy. Honestly, it was not a great week for tight ends, but Caden Prescorn stood out to me. 3 catches for 41 yards. The Mississippi running game clicked like crazy. 49 carries, 317 yards. That's 6.5 yards a carry. They allowed 0 sacks on Dart, the quarterback, Jackson Dart. 60.8 PFF grade for Prescorn. I know it's not amazing, but it was one of his better performances of the season. He's starting to stand out as a draftable tight end in this upcoming class. I like what I see. Eric All, I believe a new name to this weekly segment of Iowa. 4 catches, 67 yards, 1 touchdown. Only 1 sack was allowed on Iowa quarterbacks the whole game. 74.4 PFF grade. So he's starting to make waves. And here's a late round super sleeper. He'll be lucky to get drafted. Jalen Conyers of Arizona State. 6 catches for 40 yards, 0 sacks allowed on Arizona State quarterbacks. 64.3 PFF grade. Starting to make some waves as a guy who could be like a 7th round pick, but we are going to maybe need to come up big in the 6th or 7th round when trying to find another tight end. Interior offensive line. This was a really rough week for interior offensive linemen, or offensive linemen in general, I think. Graham Barton did not play. A couple other of my favorite guys, like I think KSU didn't play this week. So I was able to reduce it down to Bryce Foster of Texas A&M. Texas A&M ran the ball all over their opponent this week, 204 yards, 5.2 yards a carry. No sacks allowed, no pressures allowed by Bryce Foster on their quarterback. 66.1 PFF grade. Christian Mahogany of Boston College, 203 rushing yards, 4.3 yards per carry for Boston College. 0 sacks on Castellanos. 74.9 PFF grade. He continues to kind of vacillate around in that mid-round area of most mocks that I've seen. Zach Frazier of West Virginia, 200 rushing yards for them, 4.7 yards a carry, no sacks allowed on their quarterback. 71.5 PFF grade for Zach Frazier. None of these guys allowed any QB pressures on the week. So really good week for those 3 guys. Unfortunately, there wasn't a heck of a lot else I could find. So hopefully next week we come back a little bit stronger. Okay, now we're flipping on over the defense here. We've got a couple of Texas A&M guys, so that's a little bit new. And we've got a couple of other guys who haven't made this list yet this season, so some new faces. Shamar Turner's first of A&M. 4 tackles, including 2.5 for a loss. 0.5 sacks. 2 pressures. 42 rushing yards allowed by A&M. I believe they were playing Arkansas. So they were playing one of the best running backs in the country and KJ Jefferson, and allowed barely over 1 yard a carry. 174 total yards allowed. PFF grade was 63.6. Reasonable, respectable. So Shamar Turner starting to get some attention as a mid to late round guy. Rook Horo of Clemson finally made a notable impact on a game this year. First time. Welcome aboard, Rook. 3 tackles, 1 for a loss, 1 sack. 100 rushing yards allowed by the Clemson D, 2.9 yards a carry. 286 total yards allowed, 14 points allowed. PFF grade 58.3. I know it's not a ton. I know it's not amazing, but it was probably the most impactful Rook has been this season. So Rook making some strides in the right direction here finally. Dante Corleone shows up here again for Cincinnati, the Bearcats. 4 tackles, half a tackle for loss, 2 QB pressures, 70 rushing yards allowed for the Bearcats defense, 2.5 yards a carry, just under 300 yards allowed, 73.8 PFF. If you're looking for run stuffers in this upcoming draft, Tavondre Sweat and Tyleek Williams have been 1 and 2 for sure, but Corleone I think is starting to get into that next tier of big run stuffers that you might want to add to your team if you're looking for that kind of player this offseason. McKinley Jackson of Texas A&M also made a nice impact on that Arkansas game. When you hold Arkansas to 42 rushing yards, you did something right. 3 tackles, 2 for loss, a half a sack, 2 pressures. Like I said, 42 yards allowed, 1.1 yards per carry, 174 total yards allowed on defense. And he actually had a really nice grade, 76.5 PFF grade. So McKinley Jackson is doing the thing. Jordan Birch of Oregon, new name here, but he had a big game against Stanford. I know it's easy competition, but Jordan Birch is starting to make a little bit of headway as a draftable guy. 6 tackles, 2 for loss, 89 rushing yards allowed against Stanford, 1.9 yards a carry, 222 total yards allowed, 6 points allowed. So dominant day for the Oregon defense. 74.6 PFF grade. Jordan Birch is going to start pushing up as a late round guy. I think maybe he can work his way up to the mid rounds. All right, linebacker up next. Mostly familiar names here, but we did finally get some theme out of a couple of big names, which was nice. And we do have one new name here, so let's jump right in. Smael Mondon Jr. of the University of Georgia, I think had probably his best game of the year, which isn't saying a ton, but I am starting to like him a little bit more than the Dumas Johnson guy on Georgia. 11 tackles, 2 for loss, a sack, 2 QB pressures. Georgia only allowed 307 yards and 60.3 PFF grade. I know the grade isn't great, but it's workable, and he did make some big splash plays in this game. Also, want to give a shout out once again. This is not the first time I've mentioned this guy, Jalen Ford of Texas. 7 tackles, 1 for loss, 2 QB pressures, 260 yards allowed, 14 points allowed, by the Texas defense and a 70.8 PFF grade. I'm continuing to like him as a 6th or 7th round guy. We got Barrett Carter and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. listed here, by the way. Both Clemson guys finally showed up to the party. 7 tackles for Carter, 1.5 for loss, half a sack, 100 rushing yards allowed by Clemson's defense, 2.9 yards a carry, 286 yards allowed, 14 points allowed, 76.3 PFF grade. And Jeremiah Trotter had similar impact. He actually had an interception as well, though. PFF grade of 68.4. He had half a tackle for loss, but he also added the interception, which was notable because so far this year he's struggled in coverage. Coverage has been a problem for Jeremiah Trotter Jr. So if he can improve in that area, he becomes, in my opinion, a far more legitimate linebacker prospect. And new name here, we've got Tyron Hopper of Mississippi. He had 6 tackles, including 1 for loss and a QB pressure. And Mississippi's defense was dominant against the run. 41 rushing yards allowed, 2.1 yards a carry, 300 yards, 72 PFF grade. So he's kind of a new late round name to watch for. He's somebody who could be like a 6th or 5th round pick, I think. Tyron Hopper, worth keeping an eye on. And now we move along to safety here. Handful of standout safeties this week. Cole Bishop stood out to me for Utah, even though Utah could not get the win because they have no offense. 7 tackles, including half a tackle for loss and a pick, 70 PFF grade. He did everything he could. That Utah defense in general did just about everything they could. Tyler Nubbin of Minnesota, always one of my favorites. 5 tackles and a QB pressure, 1 interception, 68 PFF grade. Javon Bullard, welcome to the party for Georgia. He had a big game, and this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? When teams like Georgia actually play decent teams that give them a real game, like Georgia had last week, then their big stars are going to be more likely to put up big numbers because they actually have to play the whole game. 10 tackles, 2 passes defense, 71.3 PFF grade, so big game for Bullard. Malachi Moore had another impressive game, 6 tackles, including 2 for a loss. Alabama's defense was locked down, 261 yards allowed, 17 points, 65.5 PFF grade for Malachi Moore. And my final guy is a guy who I was actually a little bit down on so far this year. He had a nice game for Colorado State. It's Jack Howell. 9 tackles, 1 QB pressure, and an interception that he returned 26 yards, 73 PFF grade. Other than the Colorado game, which even that I'm not so sure about, probably his best game of the year. Maybe just flat out his best game of the year. So that's my rundown for the week. We've got a few new names here, but it's a lot of familiar faces as well. Starting to get a better and better idea of who is standing out in college football this year. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I missed anything. Let me know how you feel about these guys. There's starting to be some clarity at these clear positions of need, and I'm starting to appreciate it. So every week that goes by, we learn more and more, and can't wait to see what we learn next week. All right. Go Washington, bow down to Washington, go Seahawks, and I will see you guys next week for this segment once again.